Welcome to the MBN Solutions UK Data Salary Survey 2022 podcast. My name is Robin Huggins. I'm Client Services Director for MBN Solutions, a recruitment, talent advisory and people solutions business based in Glasgow, Scotland. We specialise in solving talent problems in the data space, and our recently published salary survey was augmented by some research around four main topic areas that we, our clients and our community, regard as crucial to the attraction of niche talent such as data analysts, data scientists and data engineers. In each episode of the podcast, we'll take a deeper dive into one of these topics, with a special guest providing their input based on their background and experience in the data space. This episode, our topic is the impact of globalisation of talent. Globalisation has been a theme of data talent acquisition strategy for several years now. However, events such as Brexit, pronounced local talent shortages, and the societal impact of the recent pandemic have accelerated many organisations towards more widely adopting work from home, work from anywhere, and remote hybrid work combinations. Joining me today to discuss this topic in more detail is Stephen Garland, Chief Technology and Product Officer at Trustpilot. Stephen, good day to you, sir. Welcome.
Hey Rob, how are you doing?
I am good, fella. I am good. Stephen, you and I have known each other for a number of years now, but I'm conscious that there will be some viewers and some listeners who won't know you. So if you can, please, sir, a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from? What do you do? All that kind of good stuff.
Good, thanks, Rob. Yes, so I'm Steve Garland. I'm actually working my notice now as the CTPO for Trustpilot before I start my next exciting new role in the tech energy space with a company called Dare. We're on an amazing journey to help the world reach a greener 100% renewable future faster. But during the last 4 years in Trustpilot, I was basically responsible for anything and everything related to data, product, and technology, working with a globally distributed team across 7 cities in 6 countries. I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I've been in the technology arena for 24 plus years. Crikey, it sounds a long time now, but that's where the grey hair comes from. I started way back as a software engineer, progressing through the levels to tech leadership before making the change to management and then executive leadership. During that time, I've successfully navigated multiple acquisitions, 2 exits, and most recently last year, a UK IPO of Trustpilot. Also on that journey, I've also taken 2 enterprises through a transformation to the cloud, all of which have included both building, establishing, scaling, leading globally distributed teams to deliver that vital customer and shareholder value. And I'm really looking forward to this, Rob. So let's get cracking.
Nice one. Thank you. Thank you. For many people, the recent developments in globalisation of talent will be an entirely new experience, but not for you. When, where, and how did you first start embracing the globalisation strategy?
Great question, Rob. And look, I'll go back in time. And it's an interesting one. When you say, when did I embrace it? There's probably 2 dates here. When did I start doing globalisation of talent? And then when did I embrace it, right? There's 2 separate bits there, right? Yeah. So it started way back in 2002 in a company I used to work for called Telelogic. It was a company that had multiple different facets towards it. And I was in the requirements management space. But part of the business, most of their R&D was actually over in Irvine in California or in DC, where the talent was just excruciatingly expensive. And there was a big push from the board at the time to reduce costs and start to look at alternatives for scaling teams. So they managed to get a contract with a firm up in Mumbai. So we ended up piggybacking on that contract. And I got 3 contractors in Mumbai to help us scale one of our core product lines. And I'll be brutally honest, it was an absolute disaster. It didn't work well at all. And part of why it didn't work actually wasn't because of the individuals, right? It wasn't because of the individuals on either side. I mean, there was a little bit of fear at the time where I'm going to lose my job in the UK, everything's going to go to India and so on back in those days. But the challenge was actually the operating model and the capability, right? I mean, when you think about it, at the time we'd grown up with our full teams around us, right? And you had a problem, you go and talk to someone across the corridor over the other desk. Or if you had a new recruit, a graduate started, you sit and pair them up and they'd sit side by side and they'd see all the things that they don't hear on telephone calls or video conferences. And back in those days, video conferences were, you had to book the boardroom, right? Because you didn't have the same technology back then, right? Even the collaboration tools weren't there. So that one, the first kind of foray into globalization of talent for me wasn't successful, but it wasn't successful because of the talent. It was because of the behaviors and the mindset. Moving forward in time, 2004, the same company I was in decided, right, we're actually going to establish a presence and do it properly and build our own teams. So we actually started to build our own team in Bangalore, pre an acquisition by IBM that we were doing. And that, I would say, was when I embraced the globalization. Now, why? You say, well, back then what we did is we approached it entirely differently. We looked at how do we make them successful, not us successful, right? And by doing that, you change your mindset in terms of how do you operate with them, right? How do you operate with a resource pool that's in a different time zone, a different location, has a different culture, right? I mean, the cultures are a big play in this. And we went through multiple different ways. We'd actually bring people over for 2 months to help them get introduced to the company, understand the business, the culture, the people, and actually establish those big relationships. And we'll talk about this throughout the podcast, but the vital piece for me is first and foremost, for any globalization talent strategy to work, has to be built on trust, and it has to be built on big relationships. So you have to establish them somehow. They're hard to do remotely, but they can be done. But I found in the early days back in 2004, physical presence. So we would fly out to the other side, would bring these teams over, would mix the teams up, would have regular communications and ceremonies, very clear roles and responsibilities on who can make a decision, who's an inform and who's a contribute. Some of the old school ways of working, but it really does help create that seamless boundary or operating model between two sites. And ever since then, crikey, it's almost like second nature now, right? I don't even think about it. I do my teams. I mean, it's just a way of working now, right?
Yes, it is. And what I want to ask is, I think if we leave aside the first foray and focus on the second one,
yep,
reflecting on those early days,
yep,
how do they compare to now?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to, I know you said we'll step away from the first foray, but I think that's quite important actually, Rob, right? Because if I go back to 2002, 2004, and even, crikey, probably all the way up through the early 10s, you know, I think a lot of the globalization strategies was purely on cost, not value, right? And, you know, back when I started, you could get a whole team for the price of one engineer, right? Now that's not the case, and that's good, right? Because that means the whole world has moved along with the capabilities, the talent availability, the maturity in operating models and communication. So I think now it's more seen around how do you increase the customer and shareholder value and increase velocity, right, with scale versus save cost. Now, cost is a big thing for sure, right? And you've got to be very, very careful on how you build your team, but that goes for wherever you build it, whether it's on-site, offshore, off-site, doesn't really matter. But I think the main twist for me now is it's less about 100% just driving the cost down. It's more about scale, value, and execution.
Brilliant answer. Brilliant answer. Now, here's a tricky one for you. Is globalization as a talent strategy a universal that you personally will utilize in any role in any company, or do you see it very much as organization specific?
I think it is organization specific to a certain point. I think what I've found in my career, Rob, is I've almost built a toolbox or a playbook, if you will, right? In every scenario, you go to a different part of that playbook, right? So, you know, when you start a new business, if I start a new startup to scale up, I look at the strength of the leadership. I look at can they actually lead and operate a global team versus a local team? Are they ready? Do they have the skills and the talents? So you look at the maturity of the business to depend where on that kind of scale of globalization of talent, you can insert the different elements and which parts you need to grow and establish and build. So, you know, I think what I've found is I learned a lot, and I still replay a lot from those early days in 2002, 2004, all the way through the 10s and the teens. But I think there's a lot of it which is emerging and new that I'm learning and adapting and kind of establishing and evolving. So do I think there's one global one you can just cookie cutter in? No. Do I think there's multiple different elements that you can repeat and you can drop in depending on maturity, capability, and environment? Absolutely.
So you mentioned some of the challenges that you had, and much is mentioned about the advantages that can be gained from globalizing your data talent. But what, from your experience and perspective, are some more of the disadvantages?
Yeah, I think we're yet. I mean, COVID's come hard and fast at us and kind of forced the hand of a lot of businesses. We were very fortunate that my current organization, Trustpilot, we were well established for that globalized kind of footprint, right? We've got engineers in, like I said, 7 cities, 6 countries, right? So we're kind of used to that. I think if I take all those elements out of the equation, one of the things that's really hard, and I was chatting to 2 fascinating chaps yesterday, and I was reflecting when I was walking the dog. One chap called Jamie, quite an established technical leader, and another one of the chaps who was called Ruefa, and he's on his the early stages of his engineering career. Very capable, very talented individual, but both of them are in a world where they're in this mixer today. And what they talked about, Rob, and this is why I think this is important about one of the challenges. What they talked about was, to be the best at what we're doing and to really make that difference, we've got to really sit and understand the problems, not the solutions that people need, the problems that people face. Really understand that to provide the best quality solution. And that means getting in front of our stakeholders, sitting with them, living in their shoes, working beside them, seeing what they don't tell us, but seeing what they do. Right. And that's a skill that I've fine-tuned and honed over my career. And when those 2 chaps were talking about that so beautifully yesterday, it made me really reflect that, we talk about globalization, but there's this core need to still have these relationships with your stakeholders, still have these relationships with your peers. And we need to really start to look at how do we improve that through a virtual means, because I don't think we're fully there yet. I mean, we're inundated with these tools, Slack and Confluence, and you've got your Zooms and Teams and Google Meets and whatever, right? And they're all great, but that doesn't give you that human connection, right? And I think that's always going to be something that is an opportunity for us to conquer, to really get that globalization of talent to be maximized.
So I'm thinking here from the perspective of somebody, and you mentioned there individuals that you knew that were on their journey, and somebody who's maybe on a similar journey to you, but maybe earlier in the process. So they may be an aspiring technology leader, but with not as many miles on the clock as yourself. A bit of advice from the wise sage here. What new, unfamiliar, or unexpected challenges will globalization of your talent pipeline bring?
I think it is going to be down to, there's multiple factors to that, Rob. I think you can get away with certain things being a little bit ambiguous and a little bit vague in our world, right? When you're all in the same space. I think what I see is there's multiple things at play now that any leader is going to have to really be mindful and really kind of focused upon. One is the clarity. So really being sure that, you can provide that level of clarity to teams both on site, off site, and around, to make sure that everybody knows where they're heading, where they're going, and what's the purpose. Other parts are going to be making sure that you keep your eye on the changing dynamics of the talent market. I mean, if I take Trustpilot as an example for this podcast, we've taken away the split of salary differences between London and Edinburgh, right? We've just removed them. We don't have a band between London and Edinburgh now. We have a UK band. Now, why do we have that? We were losing engineers to London that would be working remotely in Edinburgh. Right. So we decided, right, actually, let's just take that boundary away and make sure that we're competitive. Right. So I think you've got your clarity, you've got your competitiveness, And then you've got your purpose. So engineers now and developers, data engineers, data scientists, leaders, they're more focused now in the world we live in on being sure they can attach their purpose to what impact are they making either against the community, the consumers, businesses, or the planet, right? And I think these are all vital ingredients. So I think when you think about us as leaders, there's extra things that we used to just take for granted that now are actually vitally important. There's things that we think people could maybe fill the gaps of. We need to provide that clarity. We need to make sure that we've got clear roles, responsibilities, boundaries to be able to really fulfill that success of a global team.
Okay, no, I remember speaking to you, and I think it was just around the time that you were starting out at Trustpilot, and I remember your model at the time, and that those cities and and the workforce being spread throughout the world. And then obviously the events of the last couple of years have kind of forced a lot of organisations' hands into maybe adopting the same kind of strategies that you had adopted all those years ago. Were there any changes or differences that you experienced at Trustpilot as a consequence of everybody else jumping on that same wagon train? Did it affect the flow of talent into your organisation?
Yeah, it did, Rob. Two things it did actually, and there was more talent available if businesses, or well, let me say it a different way. Our current world, we've got models where we can hire people into areas where we have a presence because of the tax regimes and whatnot of the local countries, right? So we could hire into the UK, we could hire in Lithuania, Copenhagen, Berlin, US and whatnot, right? And other European cities like Spain and Italy and Sweden we can hire from, right? So we had a wide pool. What I saw though during COVID, engineers were becoming more what's the word I'm looking for? Mobile, but not mobile because everyone was locked down. So maybe the wrong choice of word. But engineers, engineers could be mobile between organizations. So opportunities really popped up. And people were moving out of Silicon Valley, and they were still working for their main hubs inside Silicon Valley. So I think what I found certainly was talent acquisition became very hard. For the really, really good ones, they became very, very expensive, right? Because all of a sudden you could be commanding a New York salary in Edinburgh easily if you're willing to do that time shift in hours, right? And that was something we all faced. And I think even going back to December last year, the shift in salary was a phenomenal move, right? We've got this term, the Great Resignation. I don't know if that's still kind of ringing around us. I think Trustpilot, we're still seeing some of that, where it's easier to move. There's less friction to move. Businesses have got more adept at recruiting faster, shorten that interview cycle, right? I mean, it takes me back to days in Sage. I remember we needed to hire a team. We booked out a nightclub and we got a barbecue and we got a DJ in, and we were signing contracts that night.
I love it.
In the club. And we hired 7 people in one night in a club by just hosting this event to really show that actually you can be fleet of foot. You get your best interviewees, few round tables, get some beer, get some burgers, get some music. And we hired some really top talent in Newcastle in one night. And I think why I mentioned that, Rob, is I think we all in this world today, you can win or lose top talent in the space of hours.
Yeah.
Not days, not weeks, not even months, it's hours. So you have to adapt to that model too. And a lot of businesses did really quickly. And so talent doesn't last long. Salaries, you need to be really acutely aware that you're no longer paying an Edinburgh salary, you're actually paying a global salary.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that was the biggest change I found over that period. But equally for us, our world opened up to these engineers that were out of reach before.
Yep.
Right. So I think it was a bit of give and take, really. And we lost. It'd be wrong of me not to share that we lost a fair chunk of really good talent through COVID because opportunities arose that were maybe had more clarity, maybe had better opportunity and more purpose and whatnot, right? which just sharpens everyone's tools.
Back to this, to your role as a leader and the responsibility that you have for that organizational culture. Much is said about the impact, normally negative, that remote or globalized working solutions can have on organizational culture. Now, as a veteran of this space, and as somebody who's obviously solved that problem in some respects, how can those negative impacts be mitigated?
So let me start, Rob. I think in complete humbleness, I guess, is we've not solved those, right? So I think we still face those challenges, right? I think we've done some really great stuff to mitigate as much as we can, but I think there is always stuff you have to continually improve, and I wouldn't say we've mastered it yet, if you like. I think the one thing what I'm seeing a lot of is you need a hybrid solution, right? So, I mean, talking back to Jamie and Ruefa, right? Those two are keen to go into the office regularly to soak up and sponge that insight and that intel to make them the best of their game, right? And there's a lot of new talent coming that want that kind of social interaction, those big relationships. Now, it's not for everyone, and that's fine. So I think first thing is make sure you've got a talent model that gives you that hybrid option where people can connect, build relationships, really get that interaction to help them on their accelerated path. Some of those people will be the people that move through the organization and climb the ladder quickly because they just have that thirst to learn and grow. I think other things is, it's actually my CEO says this, and it's a line that I've got no shame in stealing from him, Peter Mulman. First of all, go on the basis that the intent of the individual is good. Right. And I think that's a fabulous
trust from earlier. Yeah.
Exactly, Rob, right? And I think it's nobody comes in to be nasty, right? Everyone comes in with the good intentions to do a great job or be good, but be kind and go in with that intention that everybody's intentions are good from their world, and seek to understand why there's a disconnect, right? Because most of the friction in global teams come from disconnect versus bad behavior. Bad behavior comes after the disconnect and then the festering of lack of communication, which usually comes from the lack of clarity, right? So I think it's seeking that clarity. You know, I trust first as a leader, and I think it can get you in trouble sometimes, but on the whole, it's a good way to roll, and always see that the person's intent is coming from a good place. I think, you know, we've got lots of communication tools and so on. They can actually be to your downfall. Some rules that are good to implement are, after 2 notes, if it's not resolved, pick up some form of communication in voice or face, ideally face, right? Because something's not connecting and it's just going to blow into something else. And be cautious of what you escalate. You know, I think there's a saying one of my old leaders from very early on used to say, challenge exaggeration, Steve. So when someone comes in and says, this is all bust, challenge that. What's bust? Break it down for me, right? And what can you control versus not? So I think it's a tricky one, Rob. I think a lot of it comes down to just good human practices, right? Good human practices, good operating models, good clarity on roles and decisions, right? So understand who can actually make a call and who can't, right? I mean, a lot of the time is you end up with these multiple meetings, multiple ceremonies, and you can spend your whole day in meetings, but make sure you know what you're going in to decide, and make sure you know who's got the ability to decide it. And if you haven't, question the meetings, right? Question the purpose of what you're trying to do, because it just builds up that pent-up frustration. And really work hard on clarifying your strategy, right? Because if you've got a clear strategy, you've got a clear purpose, you've got a clear vision, right? You're starting to build that clarity. Next layer down starts to add the meat and the bones to that vision, that strategy with extra clarity, and off you go. But it's hard, right? It's not an easy thing. You know, people are complex individuals, right? Or complex beings. And, you know, you've got to really figure out what makes people tick and make sure that you listen well. right? And respond to challenges quickly. Problems get bigger with time, and harder decisions get harder with more time.
You mentioned the example of the I think you said it was the Edinburgh engineer who could command the New York salary or the Silicon Valley salary.
Yeah.
So I want to look at that reward element in a little bit.
Yep.
Look at it a little bit deeper if we can. So we know that reward elements have also been impacted by these fundamental changes in where talent is sourced from. Any experiences or examples of this phenomenon have you experienced where you can maybe provide a little bit of guidance or wisdom for those out there that are going to have the same challenge, competing for local talent on a global scale or global talent on a local scale? What words of wisdom could you give?
Yeah, so I think if you're going to go for global talent, make sure you've got a really good operating model to deliver and execute, right? And it doesn't have to be this big complex. I don't want it to sound like it's a big complex corporate world coming down, but just be very, very clear on, it's back to that simple decision framework model, right? If you've got a good decision framework model and you've got a good cadence of kind of communicating model of when often, what do you decide, what meetings are for what purpose, what's decided in those meetings for all levels, right? So it can cascade through and make sure everyone's aligned to the same objectives. That helps you on that global model. Make sure you've got leaders or talent in your team that are comfortable to manage and actually grow individuals that are not sitting beside them, right? So, I mean, you do have to build into your team leaders who have managed globally, I would say, right? Because if you've not, it's a very long process to quickly learn and adapt into that arena if you're not used to it. So I'd always say, look, try and build a bench with talent that is used to and comfortable with global leadership. And I think even, and this goes for the local side as much as the global side, Rob, make sure you've got that really crisp purpose, right? Because today's talent wants to believe they're doing good, want to be integrated into things that are having positive impact, want to go join companies that have a good ethos, that are doing good for the world, right? And they're not like the kind of organizations that sometimes people kind of go, ooh, I'm maybe not sure I'd work for them. Make sure you stand out, right? Because I think that is a universal objective, whether you're talent locally or globally or a mix of both. Because that's what attracts the people, right? And then get a few good people in, they bring good people.
You bring people in
before you know it, you built your team, right?
So looking slightly broader now than that experienced hire marketplace. So other than competing for global talent in that experienced hire marketplace, do you have any examples of where you've also looked to nurture and grow talent at a grassroots level? I'm thinking here about, maybe academic collaborations with universities throughout the world, or retraining partnerships, or working with organizations in a disparate sense that will help you to grow and nurture that talent.
Yeah, we've done things in Europe and Lithuania, and I've done things in Edinburgh as well. We've worked in previous roles. We've worked with the Code Client in Edinburgh, and we've also taken students directly from MIT as well. Actually, when I had a role in Boston with Logic Now, and I think that there is a key to that, Rob. I think it's funny you say this, because going back to that chap I was talking to yesterday, I took a lot of energy from the conversation, UEFA, and his opening line to me, or second line he opened with, was, I've not been in software engineering long, so I've not learned a lot of the habits, right? And it stuck in my mind, and it stuck in my mind for two reasons. One is, I don't always follow rules, and any of my previous bosses will tell you that, right? There is a rule book, and I choose whether I use it or not, right? Because typically, if everyone follows the rules, there's no opportunity for something new. So I kind of pick my own path and break rules a little bit now and again. But what I found from this chap's conversation yesterday, and why I'm going, this is going to come to a point in a minute, this individual was learning his own way and experimenting, and he was doing things right, but slightly unconventionally towards a stereotypical software engineer.
What the book would say.
Yeah, exactly, Rob. Exactly, right. And I think the advantage you've got of getting new talent is, and straight out of university or maybe relatively new in their careers through a reprogramming or a reskilling, is that they maybe not have bad habits. They maybe not have memory muscle that's maybe okay, but what if they've got new memory muscle that is going to be more advantageous for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, having an engineer that goes out and sits with their stakeholders for a day and actually just sits and watches and asks and learns and then gives them something back, I mean, that's like gold dust, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, if you follow the path, you might not end up at that journey, right? So I think to your point, I think it's great and you should, and every company should embrace these models. We've been a bit slow off the mark at Trustpilot and fully getting into that, purely because we've opened a new office in Edinburgh. We had to scale it quickly through COVID, and we had ambitious plans for the IPO where we needed to get experienced talent in quickly to execute against our strategy and our strategic objectives. So we're at the point now where we're starting to look at, okay, we've got a really solid team, really solid leaders. Now we can start to grow and scale with a mix of both new talent and perhaps a graduate or intern style. We've actually got our first intern in the summer.
Hey.
In the tech space, that is, we've got interns in other areas like finance, HR, and whatnot, but we've actually got them in the tech space now.
Okay. Final couple of questions, Steve. Looking forward, looking into the future just for a minute, can you anticipate the direction of travel for globalization over the next few years? What do you think's coming?
I think there's going to be a shake-up in how we actually go after, or how we go to secure or acquire talent. I think that whole world's going to change quite quickly, right? I mean, in some ways, because it's so freely available or is globally available now, I think there's going to be more opportunities to recruit teams or individuals from countries you didn't have access to. And what do I mean by that, Rob? I mean, more businesses providing the services that allow you to payroll someone in a country where you don't have a tax presence, right? And taking care of that for you, kind of like BPOs for that world, but on a more permanent style basis. I think payroll as a service will be a bigger thing that will open the doors up. I think the opportunity for people to gain more skills quickly will also accelerate with just people having the opportunity to work in more diverse businesses in a shorter period of time. I think the tenure will drop because of that. I think your longer tenures of, I mean, right now you're probably you'll know better than me, Rob, but maybe 2 years.
Yeah, just under cases.
Just under 2 years. I can see that drop into even a year. Right. And so I think businesses will really need to look at how they do their onboarding, how they accelerate that onboarding to productivity of teams and engineers and data scientists and technical resources. And I think businesses will need to work a lot harder to be able to retain staff, right? Make that purpose very, very clear on what people want to see. Make sure you provide the clarity where they know they're having impact, and make sure your reward and your remuneration is competitive, right? I mean, I just saw this week, Microsoft made an interesting post that they've doubled their salary budget. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone's getting double the pay, but they've doubled that budget to be able to take care of talent with remuneration, and they've increased the stock levels as well, right? So when the big players make a move, it doesn't take long before that starts to wash through. So businesses need to get ready for that to retain the talent they do have, whilst get ready to be able to onboard and accelerate that onboarding of new talent to mitigate the risks on the strategies and execution.
Final thoughts, sir. We're going to jump in the Wayback Machine. We're going to speak to that version of yourself in 2002, 20 years ago. And what advice would you give Steve then, based on what you now know about the impact of globalization of talent?
Have a more open mind, right? I think being wiser and older now, I look through everyone's eyes. I tried to visualize what they see through their eyes, and what they're thinking, to help me make decisions and support the teams. I've found that now, if I did that earlier, I could have probably reduced a lot of the mistakes and increased the learnings and the productivity faster. And it comes back to that, look, everyone's intent is usually good. Go on that basis first. Understand what people's pain is and what's making them scared or frightened or anxious. Solve to those rather than just drive for the execution. And I think that will make you a better leader.
What a note to end it on. Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. Thanks for sharing your passion, your knowledge and your expertise on the impact of globalisation of talent. I hope you, dear viewer or listener, have enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. Please do look out for the other episodes in this podcast series, where I'll be joined by other special guests to discuss those other topics from our salary survey research: diversity in workplace, the changing shape of reward packages, and the importance of purpose in work. Visit www.mbnsolutions.com to register for your copy of our UK Data Salary Survey 2022, and follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter for the latest news, views, opinions, and of course, the hottest opportunities in the data space. Goodbye.
Thanks, Rob.